Welcome to the deep dive. We're diving deep today, really deep, into the world of Japanese thought with a fascinating figure, Kūkai, who lived from 774 to 835 CE. Now, for anyone out there who is, really interested in the big questions of Eastern metaphysics and epistemology, the nature of reality, how we know things, all that good stuff, Kūkai, he offers a really systematic and kind of innovative approach that honestly deserves way more attention in like the larger world of philosophy.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kūkai, he's not just some like minor figure, tucked away in like Japanese religious history. His ideas, they represent like a seriously sophisticated grappling with some of the most fundamental questions that philosophers have been wrestling with for centuries. And yeah, he is. He's definitely a key intellectual player in East Asian thought.
For sure. And I think, a lot of people might recognize him as the founder of Shingon Buddhism in Japan, right? It's a major school of esoteric Buddhism. But I mean, his impact, it goes way beyond just like the religious sphere, right? I mean, we're talking social welfare, education, linguistics, the arts. I mean, he was doing it all during a period of like huge transformation in Japan. But, for this deep dive, we're going to be laser focused on the philosophical system that he built.
Yeah, and it's an amazing system to unpack, right? Because Kūkai, he didn't just inherit like Buddhist traditions. He took them and kind of like forged his own very distinctive synthesis, especially in the way that he intertwined theoretical understanding with like practical ritual engagement. And that connection between like theory and lived experience, that's going to be a real key for us today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess our mission, if you will, for this deep dive is to kind of trace the development of these really interesting philosophical ideas. So we're going to start by laying out Kūkai's life and the kind of context, the intellectual landscape that surrounded the arrival of esoteric Buddhism in Japan. And then we're going to really dissect his core philosophical concepts, looking carefully at how Kūkai so brilliantly bridged those realms of abstract doctrine and then those really concrete ritual practices. So to get us started, I guess let's unpack Kūkai's life. The man himself, his biography, where did he come from?
Yeah, so I think understanding Kūkai's early life is really crucial. It gives us a lot of context. So he was born into the Seiki family. They were aristocratic, kind of had that elite status. And his early education, it was really heavily influenced by Confucianism, especially through his uncle, who was a Confucian scholar.
Got it. So, Confucianism, that's like this system of ethics and social order, really emphasizing, proper conduct, respect for authority, all that. But it doesn't sound like that framework really resonated with Kūkai for very long.
You're right, it didn't. He actually entered the state university, right?
Yeah.
Really tried to engage with it. But he found himself, more and more dissatisfied with the teachings. Like he was searching for something deeper, something more profound, something that could really speak to the existential questions he was grappling with.
Yeah, I get that. It's like, checking the boxes, going through the motions, but not really finding what you're looking for. So what did he do? I mean, it sounds like he was looking for answers outside those established institutions.
He was. He actually withdrew from formal education altogether, just kind of said, okay, I'm done with this. And he headed for the mountains. It was during this time that he really immersed himself in what, we would call esoteric practices, kind of exploring different spiritual traditions, experimenting with meditation and ritual. This period, it seems, was really, really formative for him, shaping his later philosophical leanings.
Wow, so a real seeker, huh? So at this point, he's in his early 20s, seeking answers in the mountains. And it was during this time that he wrote his first big work, right? The Sango Shiki.
Yes, exactly. The Sanshiki, which translates as indications of the goals of the three teachings. And in this treatise, he directly compared the teachings of Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. And really does offer some early glimpses into, the philosophical framework he was starting to develop.
Okay, fascinating. So he's comparing these three major traditions, right? Confucianism with its emphasis on social order, Taoism focused on harmony with nature, and then Buddhism with its, focus on transcending suffering and the cycle of rebirth. And I guess the Sanshiki, it kind of reveals where his allegiances were starting to lie.
It does. It shows a growing conviction on his part that Buddhism, it offered like a more comprehensive and ultimately more satisfying account of reality and, the path to human fulfillment than either Confucianism or Taoism could provide. And, he doesn't shy away from laying out his reasoning for making this shift.
Interesting. So he's not just abandoning those other traditions, he's actively engaging with them, comparing them, and finding Buddhism to be more compelling. And it was also around this time, right, that he had that really interesting encounter with the Buddhist priest who taught him the Kokuji Gumonji no Ho.
That's right. It's an incredibly intensive practice. It involves reciting a specific mantra 1,000,000 times. The goal is to enhance memory and understanding. And I think this experience, his early encounter with this kind of practice, it really hints at Kukai's developing interest in concrete experiential pathways to knowledge. It wasn't just about like reading texts and understanding them intellectually. He was looking for something more, something that could be embodied and directly experienced.
Right. So it's not just about filling your head with information, but really transforming yourself through practice. Like, how does this knowledge actually change who you are and how you perceive the world? It sounds like he was already pushing beyond the limitations of just intellectual understanding.
Absolutely. And, at the time, the dominant Buddhist schools in Japan, they were what we call the Nara schools. They did engage in rituals, right? But Kukai, he felt that they lacked a really coherent philosophical foundation for those practices. He was really searching for a form of Buddhism that could seamlessly integrate theory and action, where the practice directly flowed from and informed the understanding and vice versa.
Yeah, a real integrated system. So at this point, he's this independent seeker, exploring different practices and teachings in the mountains, really trying to get to that core essence of Buddhism, the part that could really reconcile ritual and lived experience with those, more abstract doctrines and theories. And it was during this quest that he came across a really pivotal text, right? The Dainichi-ki, the Mahavira Sutra.
Exactly. It was a real turning point for him. The Dainichi-ki is a central text in esoteric Buddhism, and it presented a tradition that seemed to place equal weight on both philosophical understanding and ritual practice, which was exactly what Kukai had been looking for, that integration of theory and action. And this encounter, it was really what inspired him to make that huge decision to travel all the way to China to delve deeper into the world of esoteric Buddhism.
So that trip happened in 804, right? He was around 30 years old, and he officially became a monk, got ordained so he could join this government embassy heading to Tang Dynasty, China. And I mean, Tainan, the capital, I imagine that was like this amazing hub of intellectual and religious exchange back then.
Oh, it was. I mean, it was a real melting pot of ideas with scholars and practitioners from all over Asia. And Kukai, he spent about 2.5 years there, just immersing himself in, an incredible range of subjects and practices. He delved deep into Indian Buddhist philosophy, even explored Hindu traditions, and crucially, he mastered Sanskrit. That linguistic proficiency, it would become absolutely essential for his later interpretations of mantras.
Wow, 2.5 years. Talk about a crash course. So he's in China, soaking up all this knowledge, mastering languages. But the most crucial event during that time, I think, was his meeting with Kuikuo, right? The seventh patriarch of Chenyen Buddhism, which would later become known as Xinglan in Japan.
Absolutely. That meeting, it was pivotal. Huiku personally initiated Kukai into the two main mandala systems of esoteric Buddhism, right? You have the Vajradhatu mandala, which is rooted in the Vajrakara Sutra, and then the Garpa mandala, which is based on the Mahavira Sutra, the same sutra that originally inspired him to go to China in the first place. And this transmission, this direct initiation, it formed the very heart of his esoteric training.
Wow. So he finds this teacher, this lineage holder, and receives these profound initiations. It's like all the pieces are starting to fall into place for him.
They really are. And it's important to remember that Kukai's achievements during his time in China, they were truly remarkable. He didn't just passively receive these teachings, he really excelled. He actually succeeded Huiku as the 8th patriarch of the entire lineage. And on top of that, he mastered Sanskrit, Chinese poetry, calligraphy, you name it. I mean, his intellectual energy and dedication, they were just incredible.
Yeah, talk about making the most of your time abroad, right? I mean, he was a true polymath. So 806 rolls around, and he heads back to Japan. This is a huge moment, right? He returns with this immense collection of scriptures, mandalas, philosophical treatises, poetry, ritual implements. It's like he's bringing back the treasures of esoteric Buddhism to Japan.
Exactly. And he was very systematic about it. Upon his return, he meticulously cataloged everything he brought back in a document called the Shorai Mokuroku. And this document, it wasn't just an inventory, it also clearly laid out the distinct and unique nature of esoteric Buddhism, setting the stage for its introduction in Japan.
Wow, so he's not just bringing back artifacts, he's bringing back a whole system of thought and practice. But I guess it wasn't all smooth sailing, right? I mean, he ran into some roadblocks when he tried to enter the capital.
He did. You see, the political situation at the time was pretty delicate, and there were certain factions that weren't exactly thrilled about this new form of Buddhism coming in. So Kūkai, he actually had to wait several years before he was granted permission to enter the capital.
Wow, so even with all those accomplishments, he still faced resistance. But eventually, things changed, right?
They did. A new emperor came to power, Emperor Saga. He was much more receptive to Kūkai's ideas. And in 809, Kūkai was finally summoned to Kyoto. He established himself at the Takozanji Temple, which became a real center of Buddhist activity and scholarship.
Okay, so under the new emperor's patronage, things are finally starting to look up for Kukai. And it was during this period, right, that he conducted those public rituals for nation protection, the first of their kind in Japan.
Yes. And those rituals, they played a huge role, right? They really showcased the practical power and efficacy of Shingon Buddhism. I mean, they really helped to win over the court and the public, demonstrating that this wasn't just some, abstract philosophy. It had real-world applications, the power to protect the nation and bring about tangible benefits. And this, of course, really paved the way for Shingon to become this major force in Japanese spiritual and intellectual life.
So we've got this fascinating figure, Kukai, who brings this whole new form of Buddhism to Japan, faces some initial resistance, but eventually gains recognition and establishes a strong foundation for his teachings. But now let's get to the real meat of this deep dive, right? The core philosophical ideas that Kukai developed. And it all starts, I think, with his really crucial distinction between what he called esoteric and exoteric Buddhism.
Right, that distinction, Miki versus Kengyu's, it's really the foundation of his entire system.
Hmm.
And, while those terms themselves might have been floating around in Japan before Kukai, he really infused them with a whole new level of philosophical depth and meaning.
Okay, so it's not just about the words themselves, but how he actually redefined them, drawing on all those esoteric texts he brought back from China. And this distinction, it wasn't just a semantic thing, right? I mean, it reflected some really, really deep differences in how these two forms of Buddhism understood things like the nature of the Buddha, the nature of truth, and even the very path to enlightenment.
Exactly. So for Kukai exoteric Buddhism, it kind of viewed the Hoshin, right? That's the Dharmakaya, the embodiment of ultimate truth. Exoteric Buddhism saw it as something like fundamentally abstract, transcendent, silent, not really something that actively communicates or preaches. But esoteric Buddhism, it took a very different perspective. It saw the entire phenomenal world, like everything we experience, as the active expression and the preaching of the Hoshin.
So in a way, esoteric Buddhism sees the universe itself as a kind of sermon or revelation of truth. It's like the Hoshin is speaking through the very fabric of reality.
Exactly. And that leads us to another key difference. Exoteric Buddhism traces his lineage back to the historical Buddha, like Yamuni, right? But Kukai, he argued that esoteric teachings, they actually originate directly from this cosmic Buddha, Dainichi. And that shift, that change in authority and where knowledge comes from, it's really significant.
Yeah, I see that. It's like shifting the source of truth from a historical figure to a kind of cosmic principle. And then there's also the question of the Dharma itself, right? The ultimate truth that Buddhism is all about. How did those two perspectives differ on that?
Well, a lot of exoteric traditions, they believe that the Dharma, it transcended the limitations of the phenomenal world and even human language. It was seen as something ultimately inexpressible. But Kukai's esoteric view, it argued that the Dharma is actually constantly being articulated and embodied within the phenomenal world itself, in its sounds, its movements, its forms, even in our own thoughts.
Yeah.
It's a much more imminent understanding of truth. It's not out there somewhere. It's right here, right now, in everything we experience.
Yeah, that's a pretty big difference, right? So it's not just about like intellectually grasping some abstract concept of truth, but actually experiencing it directly in the world around us. And that difference in understanding the Dharma, it also leads to a different understanding of how we actually come to know that truth, doesn't it?
Exactly. So Kukai, he felt that, exoteric Buddhism, it really emphasized intellectual study of scriptures, which is important, of course. But he also felt that it lacked a kind of direct experiential methodology for truly grasping these esoteric truths, the kind of truths that are beyond words and concepts.
So he was looking for a more embodied, experiential approach to knowledge, something that could go beyond just reading and thinking.
Right. And esoteric Buddhism, it offered what he called a bodily hermeneutic. The idea is that these esoteric truths, these deep truths, they're hidden within the esoteric scriptures, but they're also like woven into the very fabric of reality.
Mm.
And you can only access them, really experience them through specific practices, rituals, and meditative techniques. It involves engaging your entire being, your body, your speech, your mind.
It's like you're not just trying to understand truth with your intellect, you're trying to become one with it, to embody it.
Exactly. And finally, we have this question of time, right? How long does it actually take to reach enlightenment? Exoteric Buddhism often talked about these vast, almost unimaginable periods of time, countless rebirths. But Kūkai, with his emphasis on this immediate embodied experience of truth, he proposed that enlightenment could actually be attained in this very lifetime, in this very body, regardless of your past karma. It's a very radical proposition. It kind of turns the traditional understanding on its head.
Yeah, it definitely shakes things up. And that idea, right, that's what he called Sokushin Jubutsu, attaining Buddhahood in this very body. It's one of his most central and revolutionary concepts.
It is, and we'll definitely explore it in more depth later on. But for now, I think it's important to really grasp these fundamental distinctions between esoteric and exoteric perspectives, because they really lay the groundwork for everything else in Kūkai's philosophical system.
Right. So these two different approaches to Buddhism, they're not just about, superficial differences in practice or terminology. It's about a completely different way of understanding the nature of reality, the nature of the Buddha, and the very path to enlightenment.
Exactly. And to understand these differences more fully, we need to dive into how Kūkai reinterpreted the traditional Buddhist understanding of the Buddha himself.
Okay, so traditional Mahayana Buddhism, it articulated this doctrine of the Trikaya, right? The three bodies of the Buddha. You have the Dharmakaya, which is the body of truth, then the Nirmatakaya, which is the transformation body, like the historical Buddha, Kukyamuni, and then the Samphogakaya, which is the enjoyment body, the celestial Buddhas who kind of embody the bliss of enlightenment. So how did Kūkai engage with this framework? Did he just accept it as it was, or did he do something, a little more creative with it?
Yeah, he definitely put his own spin on it. I mean, he took that concept of the Dharmakaya, the Hoshin, and he really took it to like a much more literal and expansive level than his predecessors. For him, the Hoshin, it wasn't just this abstract impersonal principle or, just a collection of all the enlightened qualities. It was actually embodied in the entirety of phenomenal existence. Like every single event, every moment, every fleeting experience, it was all an expression of this ultimate truth. The entire cosmos, it was the Hoshin.
Okay, so the cosmos itself is the body of truth. It's not just like a metaphor, it's a literal embodiment.
In a sense, yeah. And this Hoshin, it wasn't conceived as some kind of impersonal force. Kūkai explicitly identified it with the Buddha Denichi, the great sun Buddha. So the cosmos, as this manifestation of the Dharma, it was understood as the very body of Dainichi. And that's a pretty significant departure from, how the Dharmakaya was traditionally understood.
So Dainichi, the great sun Buddha, becomes this kind of cosmic personification of the Dharma, the ultimate truth. And this metaphor of the sun, as the source of light and life, it perfectly captures that kind of all-encompassing nature of the Hoshin. But this illumination, it's not just a poetic metaphor for enlightenment, right? It becomes the very omnipresence of the Dharma permeating the cosmos. It's like this active presence that is constantly communicating truth. And that's what Kūkai called Hoshin Seppo, right? This radical idea that the Hoshin is actively preaching.
Yeah, Hoshin Seppo was really, really central to his whole system. It was what set his esoteric doctrines apart from everything else. And it has these really profound implications for how we understand our own place in the cosmos.
So, how does that work? If Dainichi's body and mind are literally the universe, then the Buddha isn't some distant figure off in some other realm, right?
Exactly. It means the Buddha is imminently present, like right here, right now, within us, as us. And Dainichi's enlightened mind, the Bodhicitta, that becomes synonymous with the Mahayana concept of Hongaku, original enlightenment, which Kūkai believed was inherent in all beings. And because the Dharma, at its core, is about interdependent origination and emptiness, this cosmic embodiment of the Buddha, it can also be understood as a kind of empty body.
Right. So there's this paradox, this non-duality, right? The Hoshin is both the totality of everything and the emptiness that underlies everything.
Yeah, it's a very subtle and profound teaching. And from this foundation, Kūkai developed his own unique doctrine of the four embodiments of truth, the Shishu Hoshin.
Right, the four embodiments of truth. So we've got the Trikaya, the three bodies of the Buddha, and Kūkai comes along and adds a fourth. How does the Shishu Hoshin relate to the Trikaya? Is it like a complete overhaul, or is there some continuity there?
It kind of corresponds to the Trikaya, but Kūkai definitely reinterprets and expands it. So first, you have the Jishoshin, the self-nature body. And this refers to Danichi in this, like, eternal state of samadhi. And through this samadhi, Danichi is revealing its own nature, unfolding the Dharma through all these countless manifestations of the cosmos. It's like a constant cosmic expression of truth.
Okay, so the self-nature body, it's like the ground of being, the source from which everything arises. It's Dainichi in this pure, unmanifest state, always revealing itself. And then you have the Juryu-hoshin, right? The enjoyment body, which experiences the bliss of enlightenment.
Right. And the Juhoshin, it has two distinct aspects. You have the Jijushin, which is the self-enjoyment body, and this describes the Hoshin just experiencing its own inherent samadhic bliss, that pure joy of enlightenment. And then there's the Tajushin, the other enjoyment body. And this is where the Hoshin manifests as those celestial Buddhas, the ones who, direct the benefits and the fruits of their enlightenment toward the liberation of all beings.
So on the one hand, you have this kind of self-contained bliss of the Hoshin, and on the other hand, you have this overflowing compassion that manifests as these celestial Buddhas working to liberate all beings from suffering.
Yeah, and it's important to note that these are both expressions of the same underlying Hoshin. It's not like there were two separate Buddhas. It's just two different ways that the Hoshin manifests its activity.
Right. And then the third embodiment is the Henge Hoshin, the transformation body, which is kind of like the more familiar, historical Buddha that we see in other forms of Buddhism.
Right. The Henge Hoshin is the one that takes on a specific form, like Shakyamuni, the historical Buddha, and uses skillful means, upaya, to guide beings towards the path.
Okay, so that's where we get the teachings, the practices, the whole system of Buddhism that's been passed down through history.
Exactly. And then finally, we have the Turu Hoshin, the emanation body. And this one is really interesting because it's the most universal and all-encompassing. It's the Hoshin manifesting in an infinite variety of forms to expound the Dharma. And Kūkai, he even extended this concept to include, like, all phenomenal events and their environments as bodies that are inherently teaching the Dharma. So even the rustling of leaves, the flowing of water, the chirping of birds, it's all part of this cosmic preaching.
Wow. So in a sense, everything is a Buddha. Everything is teaching the Dharma. It's like the whole universe becomes a classroom, and everything we experience is a lesson.
Exactly. And that leads us to one of the most revolutionary implications of Kūkai's system.
Yeah.
It suggests that everything is already participating in Buddhahood.
Right. So even the celestial Buddhas, the historical Buddha, even we ourselves, we're all just different expressions of this underlying Hoshin. And crucially, all four of these embodiments, they're actively communicating the Dharma. Even Dainichi, in that eternal samadhi, is still preaching through this cosmic unfolding.
Right. And Kūkai argued that, while exoteric teachings, they ultimately derive from the Hoshin. They're kind of indirect and provisional. But Shingon, he said, it offers this direct path to receiving the Hoshin's truth, like unfiltered, timeless, absolute. And that was a pretty bold claim. It challenged the authority of the traditional scriptures, the ones based on Shakyamuni's teachings.
So he's not just saying that esoteric Buddhism is like, a different or better version of Buddhism. He's saying it's the most direct and complete path to truth. And this understanding of the Buddha as this like embodied Dharma, it leads to his framework for understanding the cosmos as the body of Dainichi. And that's where we get those three aspects of the embodiment of truth, right? The Hoshin.
Right. Kūkai really lays this out in his Sokushin Jubutsugi, which is one of his most important works. He outlines these three, deeply interconnected aspects of the cosmic Hoshin. Its fundamental nature or substance, which he explains through the 6 universal elements, Rokudai. Its forms of appearance, which he articulates through the 4 mandalas, Shimandara. And its dynamic activity or function, which he describes as the 3 mysteries, Senmitsu. And he really stresses the non-duality between the macrocosmic, like the cosmic level, and the microcosmic, the individual level, in each of these aspects. They all kind of interpenetrate each other, and they're all ultimately realized through Shingon practice and the attainment of enlightenment.
And it's interesting because later commentators, they actually categorize these 3 aspects using like Western philosophical terms. They said the 6 elements, that's metaphysics, the 4 mandalas, that's epistemology, and the 3 mysteries, that's like metapraxis. But as you said, they're all really interwoven in Kūkai's thought, and the human body plays a central role in realizing them.
It really does. It's all about embodiment. So let's start by exploring the first aspect, the somaticity of the Hoshin, which is articulated through the 6 universal elements.
Right. So what exactly does it mean to say that the Hoshin has a body? And how does that relate to those six elements?
Okay, so the Hoshin in its somaticity, it's basically identified with the entire cosmos, right?
Mhm.
That's the Kūkai or the Dharmatatu.
Yeah.
And it's conceived of as this vast organic whole where, all phenomena arise and cease according to the principle of interdependent origination. And
Yeah.
this entire cosmos, it is the body, Tai, of Danichi. But, and this is a really important point, it's not like a substantial body in the way that Western philosophy might think about substance. It's ultimately characterized by emptiness.
Okay, so it has a body, but it's not a body in the usual sense. It's an empty body. And when Kukai quotes that line from the Avatamsaka Sutra, all lands are in the body of the Buddha, he's not just being metaphorical.
Right. It's metaphorical, but it's also pointing to something very literal, very real.
Mhm.
You see, the Dharma, the truth, it's embodied in the entire cosmos, right? But it's also fully present in each and every one of its parts. It's like this idea of a hologram where the whole image is contained within each fragment. And this allows Kukai to explain how the Hoshin is actively preaching the Dharma in every aspect of the cosmos, even the tiniest particle.
Wow, so it's like a fractal, right? The same pattern repeating itself at every level of scale. And this cosmic body, it's composed of those six great elements, right? Earth, water, fire, air, space, and consciousness. And they're all kind of interwoven, interacting with each other.
Exactly. And the key here is this concept of non-obstruction, muj.
Hmm.
It means that these elements, they can all interpenetrate each other. They can coexist and interact without any kind of conflict or impediment.
Yeah.
And that's what allows for the seamless arising and ceasing of all phenomena.
Mhm.
And because this principle of interdependent origination, it ultimately leads to the understanding of emptiness, the cosmic body. It's also an embodiment of emptiness, which, also has that connotation of space.
Right. Emptiness is that ground of being, that potentiality from which everything arises.
Exactly. So Dainichi's body, as the cosmic embodiment of the Dharma, it pervades everything, right? It's like the very ground of our being, both physically and mentally. But at the same time, because it's also vast emptiness, all beings are also empty of any kind of independent, fixed self-nature.
Mhm.
And that's the paradox, the non-duality at the heart of Buddhism, right? Being and emptiness, they're not two separate things, the two sides of the same coin.
Right. So there's this profound interconnectedness, this interpenetration of everything. And that's the real key to understanding Kukai's philosophy, isn't it?
It really is. So that's the first aspect, the somaticity, the body of the Hoshin. And now let's move on to the second aspect, the form of appearance, which is articulated through the four mandalas.
The four mandalas. So how does this cosmic Hoshin, how does it manifest in these visual and conceptual frameworks?
Well, for Kūkai the mandala, it wasn't just a symbolic representation or a teaching tool. It was a fundamental mode of manifestation, like the way that the Hoshin actually appears and expresses itself. And he believed that, as we progress on the path, our own minds, they also start to align with these mandalic forms, eventually realizing a state of non-duality with the cosmic Hoshin.
So the mandala is like a blueprint of reality, a reflection of the Hoshin's own structure and activity. And Kūkai, he talked about four distinct types of mandalas, right?
He did. So the first one is the Maha Mandala, the Great Mandala. And this one depicts the cosmic Buddha, Dainichi, along with all the other Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in anthropomorphic form, like as human-like figures. And it uses specific colors to represent the different elements and, the stages of being. Then you have the Samaya Mandala, the Intention Mandala. And this one, it portrays the Buddhacum universe, like the Buddha and the universe as one, through a collection of symbolic objects representing Dainichi's fundamental intention, Samaya, his will or purpose.
Okay, so it's not just about representing the physical universe, but also the intentions and the energies that are kind of woven into it.
Exactly. Then we have the Dharma Mandala, which is the Truth Mandala, and this one depicts the universe as this ongoing communication of truth through mantric seed syllables. It's like the universe is speaking through these potent sounds.
And then finally, the Karma Mandala, the Action Mandala, which shows the dynamic activities of all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas.
Right. And this one, it really highlights the fact that, every cosmic event, every transformation, everything that happens, it's an expression of the Hoshin's activity. And Kūkai, he believed that meditating on these various mandalas, it allows the practitioner to start seeing the entire cosmos as this continuous mandalic unfolding of the Dharma. It's like you start to perceive the world through a different lens, a more enlightened perspective.
And that brings us to the third aspect, the function of the Hoshin, which is explained through the three mysteries.
Right. So the function of the Hashin, it basically encompasses all the movements and the changes and the expressions throughout the entire cosmos, and it's all categorized into these three fundamental modes of activity. Visible form, which is the realm of the body, audible sound, which is the realm of speech, and mental thought, which is the realm of mind. And together, these are known as the three mysteries.
So the Hashin expresses itself through these three channels, right? Body, speech, and mind. And these aren't just abstract categories. They're the very ways in which the Hashin is actively shaping and interacting with the world.
Exactly. And they correspond to the three mysteries that we also have within ourselves,
Mm.
our